Guys, welcome to another episode of Rennch. On today's show, we are going to work on finishing the headers of the twin-turbo Subaru flat six powered 1969 Porsche 911. Well, welcome back. Thank you guys so much for being here. As always, I'm Michael. Behind me is a 1969 Porsche 911S that was a race car. I've converted it back into a street car, and it's powered now by a Subaru flat six EZ30R twin turbo. And on today's show, we are going to work on finishing the headers for the twin turbos. Now, I had them mocked up when I brought the car to SEMA a year ago, but I've since moved the turbos, and now they're in the place that they're going to live. I need to re-modify the headers so they actually mate up to the turbos once again. Not gonna lie, I'm very intimidated by this prospect. I'm not a very good TIG welder, although I've been working on it, and I haven't done really any headers ever in my life. So this will be really, other than the mock-up I did with MIG, this will be really the first time I ever try to TIG weld a header to a turbo. So you're along for the ride with me, and I'm sure you guys are gonna be amazing and supportive in the comments. I've got a couple of different options here today. And the first option is to do what's called a fusion tack. So you use your MIG welder, the material is butted right up against each other with a really good fit, like it's a super tight fit with really no gaps. And then you give the TIG welder a quick zap, and without any filler, it just fuses the two pieces of metal together. I don't really know how to do that very well, so I'm gonna have to practice that today. The other option I'm going to explore is tacking with my MIG welder, which I'm very comfortable with, and then taking the headers off, bringing it over to the bench, grinding it all down, cleaning it up, and then finishing the whole thing with TIG welds. So we're gonna explore both of those things. I have a piece of tubing that we're gonna cut into some slices so I can practice both of these things and see how it goes. I have been actually practicing my aluminum welding, and it's coming together really well, as you can see right here. But I have a quick piece of housekeeping I wanna show you guys on the Laystern, which is the first production Subaru swap kit car. Check this out. So first and foremost, started painting the dolly that I made a few episodes ago. It looks awesome in bright orange. But check this out. CSF came over today, and they brought a 3D printed version of the custom Rennch exclusive radiator that actually fits exactly like a Porsche oil cooler, right where the factory oil coolers go. And this is a fully 3D printed radiator that we're using for mock-up to make sure everything fits the way it's supposed to. But super rad. And if you guys don't know, I still have one more spot available for my swap kit. So this is sort of the prototype in the car right now. Everything's all handmade, but everything will be eventually laser cut. But if you have a 911 or 912 and you want 300 horsepower, bolt in, and you kind of want to set it and forget it, that's what this thing is. I still have room for one more beta tester. If you are in, just send me a DM. Find me on Instagram at Rennch, blah, blah, blah. This, however, is the car we are working on today. You can see I've got the Peekaboo twin turbos, which look awesome. You'll see the exhaust is all wonky, and that's because we moved them, and now these exhaust pipes aren't where they're supposed to be. But more importantly, underneath, the headers aren't where they are supposed to be. You see that this thing is still curved where it used to be, and I've got to get this to mate up to this. I'm probably going to have to pie cut some of these things just to make sure that it hits this really tight radius. This one's right here and it has to go to there. So I can rotate this down a little bit and get this thing to punch in, but we'll see. You know, I have no idea how it's gonna work. I still have like my oil drain and things like that that are in progress, but I did decide that until these headers are where they're supposed to be, I can't really set all of my AN fittings because I don't know if they're gonna interfere, because this is like a really close, tight section here. So I'm gonna have to get this thing right to begin with. I have the proper flanges to bolt this thing right to the eventual header where it's gonna meet up. So that's correct. I also have new flanges for this, so I'm gonna have to make a new tube here for the exhaust. but that is all part of what we're working on. First things first, I'm gonna take a chunk of pipe, I'm gonna cut a few slices out of it, then I'm gonna practice either fusion TIG welding and or a couple of MIG tacks, and then see if I can TIG around to make sure it looks the way it's supposed to, and obviously it holds together. All right, you've just seen me prep these 4 pieces. I cut them, I made sure they were level. I got rid of all the slag and all the stuff on them. And then I ground out the inside, the outside, put a little chamfer on it. So this fit up is as good as you're going to get. So now that I have this, I'm gonna practice to begin with some TIG fusion tacks. So I'm gonna get these things to stay together, and I'm just gonna try to zap it with my TIG torch. Oops. See what happens? I'm gonna try to zap it with my TIG torch just so the metal melts together and I don't need any filler. Because it's really hard when you're under the car and you've gotta like put the piece up there and then you have your TIG torch, you've got a pedal you've gotta hit. My TIG torch doesn't have a hand trigger on it, so I've gotta somehow push the pedal. I literally don't have enough hands to hold up and like put a tack on with some filler wire. So I'm gonna have to do it fusion only. So for this first batch, I'm just gonna sit here at my table and practice fusion welding these 2 pieces with like various settings on my TIG welder, et cetera, and see how we go. So my first tack was perfect, and it totally fused. Then I think they canted a little bit, and I have too much of a gap on this side because I couldn't get a second tack to go. All right, so that's the situation, is that it split a little bit. Once I clamped it back together, the tacks went fine. Let me see if I can show you guys. So that is a fusion tack, no filler. And then you can see when there was some space, I just blew through. So let me try to stitch this up now. Okay, so here is the first one that I tacked with TIG and then sort of tried to figure out here. You'll see it's not awesome. I think I had too much heat. Like you can just see how much heat signature there is. This whole heat zone here is a lot. So I'm gonna lower my heat on there, and I had to patch a couple of holes. This is kind of an okay section here, but I think what happened is it just ended up getting too hot and I started burning through. So on this one, I have tacked it with MIG. So I have a nice tight MIG tack on each side. So I'm gonna bring this back to the bench and do a little TIG here and a little TIG here, and then I'm gonna grind this off, or at least down so it's flush, and then try to, weld the entire thing. And if it welds okay, I'm gonna probably end up going with this method, just because it's so much easier to tack things together with the MIG when you've got one hand. All right, guys, so here's the second one. This is the one that I tacked with MIG. And as you can see, I kind of figured a couple of things out. This is definitely a much better weld than the first one. Still working on it. Obviously I'm not the best welder, but I cleaned this one up and this is certainly good enough for what I'm gonna do. But I think this is the route I'm gonna go. A tack with the MIG over there, pie cut a bunch of stuff, and try to finish it up here on the TIG bench. All right, guys, it's a few days later and I'm back under the car now. I gotta tell you, this process is very tedious. It's a lot of like measuring and cutting and grinding and smoothing and grinding and measuring and cutting. And I've been on it for at least a couple hours now for like 2 little pieces. Let me show you what I'm doing. This is kind of close. It's almost there with my marks. I've got to still tweak it a little bit. There's just a little bit of a gap up here. See this gap? That needs to all go away with TIG. It's got to be spot on. So I'm going to continue to grind a little bit more and see if I can get the thing to fit. All right, so I've used my MIG here, and I've done like just the smallest tacks ever just to locate all this stuff. So I'm actually going to try to clean this thing up, and I'll try to TIG it if I can. You know, I'm still pretty new at it. It's not going to look great. Like, it won't probably look as good as this, but it'll be good practice for me. Okay guys, fingers crossed here. Let me do a quick little practice on this one. Make sure my settings are somewhat okay. They're pretty much where they were when I left it, so that should be all right. All right, that's as good as it gets for me. Let's go. Jump in. Always different when you have a seam to hit, though. That's the reality. All right, got the tungsten immediately stuck. Melted away the side. So, fail. One thing I'm finding helpful is shutting the lights off in the garage. So I have just focus light on this. All right, that was nice. Oh, you can hear it cracking a little bit. Need a little more heat in there. I'm so scared to crank the heat up because I don't want to burn through. Right now I'm just looking for the parts that are like beautifully matched, and I want to get a little bead on them so I can start hammering around the edge and really get this thing to match up. Another toasted tungsten, but that was pretty good. I'm definitely gonna have to sharpen a few of these. That was a nice run. Ooh, that's good. That's better. I think my amperage was a little too low. And I wasn't getting enough penetration. All right, so it's the next day, and I'm really hoping to finish off both of my turbo headers today. It was another frustrating day behind the TIG torch. As I've mentioned before, TIG is very picky. I did learn a few things yesterday that I will share with you really quickly. For those of you who don't know how TIG works, with a regular MIG torch, you have a trigger, and that feeds a spool of wire. When that wire touches the metal, it creates a spark and melts the wire and melts the metal it's touching. TIG is a little different. TIG has a tungsten, which is at the end of a torch. It's sharpened to a point, and then you've got to feed the wire with your other hand. You've got to hold the torch at a specific angle, and then you're using your foot to control the amperage of the torch. So if you really crank it, you stay in one place at a time, it can actually burn right through the metal. So you can't go too hot, but you want to go hot enough that the metal starts to pool a little bit, and then you can dab your wire as you move, and that creates the weld bead. Well, a lot of stuff can go wrong in that process. The first of which is if you accidentally touch the tungsten to the wire or to your metal, it ruins the tungsten. And I kept trying to push through like, oh, you know, I just touched it for a second, it's fine. It's really not. It really messes with the gas that's coming out, and you get these weird green sparks. So I was touching tungstens way too often. and I was ruining them. So you'd have to go through a whole process of taking them out and resharpening them and cleaning everything. It's like a whole big process. But as I was going through welding the first header, I learned a few things. One of which was I was too close to the workpiece with my torch. Once I backed it off a little bit and my weld went from like 1/8 of an inch to, let's say, like 1/4 inch or maybe a little less, I wasn't dabbing the tungsten, and the weld was becoming much more stable, and I was able to move, see the puddle, and it was great. So your eyesight can be another huge challenge with TIG welding. You have to really dial in your helmet settings, the ambient light around you. Like, you really want to be able to see the tip of your tungsten so you can see how far away it is from your metal and where you're dabbing this wire. So I've actually done a bunch to my helmet today. I replaced the front shield. It was very scratched up. So I replaced that. So now I've got a beautiful, nice front shield. I do have a cheater lens in here. So this is like a magnifying lens that you can put in helmets. Most helmets will accommodate them. You can get them on Amazon. I want to say this is like a 2.0. So this way it allows me to get really close to the workpiece and have an amplified version of it. And the other thing right back here I'm going to try today is this external light, which is down facing my workpiece. So not only can I see the arc, but I can see the entire piece of metal as well. All of it does require a little bit of dialing in with like your settings, how sensitive your helmet is, how much shade you want on it. But ideally, you can clearly see your workpiece, you can clearly see the tungsten, you can clearly see your arc, and you're able to see really well so you can lay down those dimes we all like to see. So I'm closing in on getting the second header fit up. I didn't show it because it's literally just going back and forth, cutting, grinding, sanding, cutting, grinding, sanding until you get something close. This is a piece that I have created. It's got a bunch of pie cuts in it. And then this is, of course, my V-band that goes up into the turbo. So I have these Garrett 2867, I think they are, GTX 2867. And they don't come with the other flanges. So I had to order these from Vibrant Performance. But I'm at a point now where if you can see the markings on this, and I've got some markings on this, I want to just tack this on so it is set, hopefully, where it needs to be to continue the process. I know I'm going to need to put another pie cut over here, but I kind of want to get this thing mounted where it's going to go and it sort of stabilized, if you will. So I'm going to put a couple of tacks in this thing, first and foremost. Once I get this dialed, I'll go back under the car and keep mucking around with getting the right piece to fit here, which will fit the existing header. All right, so here's the first one, which I'm quite happy about. It looks great. All bolted in the way it's supposed to. So now this is my gap on the second one. And what I've just done is tacked on this piece that interfaces here, which is the V-band setting for this particular turbo. And we've got to make a really sharp turn into the header right here. And I'm actually pretty close. I just need like a pie piece that's going to fit in here somewhere. And I'll show you right now. So this is the piece I just tacked. It fits in right there. And you can see I'm pretty close here. I need to basically make a piece that will fit in that spot. So I think what I do is basically just measure the top and measure the bottom and then try to cut a little pie cut that fits. All right, guys, so this is my fit up. Underneath, I'm pretty happy with it. There's still a couple of gaps here and there, like a 1/16 of an inch. And if anything, it'll teach me a little better TIG welding skills so I don't burn holes. So I think I'm gonna give it a go. All right, guys, here we are. Now I'm tacked together here. And we are bolted in. I've got it secured to the engine. I've got it bolted nice and tight. And I feel really good about welding this thing up now. Got this thing all tacked together and I'm going to weld it up now, hopefully with all the lessons I learned after doing the first one, and it'll look better and go a little easier, but we'll see. All right, it's cool enough to touch now. So that, I think, went pretty well. A couple things I learned from it. I started getting some orange flash while I was welding, and that is supposed to indicate that the metal isn't quite clean enough. So I'll need to do a little bit of a better job cleaning next time around. I thought I had it, but TIG is very picky, like I said. You know, in the grand scheme of things, I have a few beads here that actually look like I knew what I was doing. This was sort of at the beginning, I think, when it was really clean. So I'm just gonna have to dial in my process. I think really make sure I have that 3M scrubby and really get the contamination out of each weld. Overall though, I think it's cool. Even this thing looked pretty good. My welds got a little dry, I could see, and that's probably the same kind of thing. It's a little bit of contamination. So the reason I wanted to do this first, other than, you know, eat that frog and do the most difficult thing, is that I couldn't run my hoses. And the hoses were like feeding the oil to the turbos, draining the oil from the turbos, feeding and draining the coolant. I couldn't do any of that until I knew exactly where these were going to be, so I can route around them. Do the hardest thing first and get it out of the way. So I have these now. I'm pleased with what I did. It is not Instagram quality, but they are good welds. They will hold up. I will Cerakote this header, and I will probably end up wrapping the entire thing in some insulation as well. But this is all practice. This is all me just trying to get reps before I start trying to make these kinds of things out of stainless steel. So let's bolt it up to the car. Well, don't those look awesome? All in their permanent spot. Fantastic. Well, guys, that is going to do it for this episode. Still working on my craft in terms of TIG welding. I don't run away from things, I run to them. I try to get better at it. I hope you guys can be inspired by some of my pigeon poop welding and my attempts to continue to get better at this particular craft, which has been eluding me for a couple of years. I love the turbos. I think they look great. I'm stoked that they're on the car. They are permanently mounted where they are going to be. I'm excited to get these things Cerakoted so they look like they're gonna look, and really start dialing in the rest of the process of getting this bad boy completely running, installed, and rocking on the road. As always, thank you very much for watching. We'll talk to you soon.